If you touch that piano, I'll scrub this entire ballroom with my tongue, Ricardo Montero shouted, slapping his palm on the $450,000 Steinway. He laughed loudly as he made the bet. 8 minutes later, he was on his knees on the floor, begging her to stop playing. What could a 52-year-old cleaning lady possibly do that would leave 200 members of New York's elite in absolute silence? Marina Petrov was polishing the marble railing of the mezzanine at the Plaza Hotel that Friday night, November 23rd. She had done it for 15 years, every Friday, always at the same time, from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. She knew every corner of that ballroom like the palm of her calloused hand. She knew exactly how many steps the grand staircase had, 37, how many crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, 12 large, 24 small, and how many Portuguese tiles decorated the floor, 2,340. The event that night was special. The engagement party of Luciana Montero, daughter of businessman Ricardo Montero, had cost $180,000. Marina knew because she had seen the invoice left on the administration desk. 200 guests, all dressed in clothes that cost more than her annual salary. Men in Armani tuxedos, women in designer gowns, teenagers flaunting Rolex watches as if they were cheap costume jewelry. Marina descended the stairs carrying her bucket and cleaning supplies. 52 years weighed on her back, but she still held herself upright, a posture inherited from times she preferred not to remember. Her navy blue uniform was spotless. She took pride in that. Even if she was invisible to those people, she kept her dignity intact. The piano stood at the center of the ballroom, roped off with red velvet cords, a Steinway & Sons Model D, the same used in concert halls around the world. Marina paused for a few seconds to admire it. The ebony wood gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. The ivory keys seemed to smile invitingly. She knew that model. She knew it very well. The orchestra had stepped out for intermission, leaving the ballroom buzzing with a controlled hum of conversations and laughter. Marina used the moment to clean the area around the piano. Guests always left glasses on the velvet cover, fingerprints on the varnish. She approached with her microfiber cloth and special spray, the same formula she had researched years ago to ensure it wouldn't damage the instrument. "Careful with the keys," she murmured to herself, as she always did. It was a ritual. Each key cleaned with a precise movement, left to right, starting with middle C. Her fingers knew the texture, the weight, the resistance of each one. "Hey, you there!" The voice cut through the air like a knife. Marina looked up. Ricardo Montero was walking toward her, his face flushed with whiskey, his Hermes tie loosened around his neck. 58 years of arrogance condensed into 6 feet of muscle, maintained artificially by personal trainers and expensive supplements. "Mr. Montero," Marina said, lowering her head slightly. She had learned that direct confrontation with men like him never ended well. "What do you think you're doing?" He came closer, his alcohol-laced breath invading her personal space. "That piano is worth more than your entire life, you old hag." Some nearby guests stopped their conversations, drawn by his raised voice. Marina saw out of the corner of her eye that cell phones were starting to be discreetly raised. The digital age turned every humiliation into a spectacle. "I'm just cleaning, sir, as I do every week for—" "Cleaning?" Ricardo laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the ballroom. You don't even know what this is. It's a Steinway, you ignoramus. Steinway." He pronounced it slowly, as if speaking to a particularly slow child. $450,000. Do you understand numbers? $450,000. Marina felt the heat rise up her neck but kept her gaze lowered. 15 years of humiliation had taught her that reacting only made things worse. She had 3 grandchildren to support, a son killed in a work accident, a daughter-in-law who had run away, leaving the children behind. She couldn't afford pride. "Excuse me, Mr. Montero." Carlos, the event manager, appeared sweating under his rented tailcoat. "Is there a problem?" "Problem." Ricardo turned to him. "The problem is you let just anyone put their hands on cultural heritage. Look at this." He pointed at Marina as if pointing at a particularly repulsive insect. "Maid's hands on an instrument once played by Martha Argerich." By now, a circle of onlookers had formed. Marina counted mentally. 20, maybe 30 people watching. She saw the malicious smiles, the whispered comments, the phones recording. A teenager, Luciana, the bride-to-be most likely, laughed openly while typing something on her brand-new iPhone. "Marina is our most senior and careful employee." Carlos tried to defend her, but his voice came out weak, knowing that confronting a Montero could cost him his job. "Careful?" Ricardo grabbed the cloth from Marina's hand and threw it on the floor. "That's what you call careful. I bet she doesn't even know the difference between a piano and a toy keyboard." Marina stood still, while the microfiber cloth lay on the floor like a flag of surrender. The circle of spectators had grown to nearly 50 people, each holding their phone as if it were a ticket to the show of public humiliation. Ricardo Montero was at the center of the improvised stage, savoring every second of his cruel performance. He was the kind of man who fed on the submission of others, who measured his worth by how easily he could belittle those he considered inferior. "You know how much I pay in taxes every month, old woman?" Ricardo continued, now circling Marina like a predator studying its prey. $30,000 every month. That's more than you make in 2 whole years. And do you know why? Because I built an empire. Because I have talent. Because I know the difference between valuable things and human trash. He stopped right in front of her, so close that Marina could count the alcohol in large pores on his nose. "You're the trash, in case you missed the metaphor." Luciana Montero walked up to her father, her $40,000 Versace gown rustling like banknotes in the wind. She was 23 and already carried the same expression of casual contempt her father had perfected over decades. "Dad, let her go. She's not worth dirtying your tux over. Besides, the conductor is coming back. We want real music, not broomstick noise on the floor." The laughter that followed was like glass shattering inside Marina's soul. It wasn't just the sound of mockery. It was the sound of 200 people silently agreeing that she was nothing more than an object, a walking tool that had dared to touch something sacred. She saw familiar faces among the crowd, lawyers whose offices she cleaned, doctors whose clinics she disinfected, businessmen whose Italian shoes she had polished. None of them defended her. None even looked away in shame. Carlos, the manager, made one more pathetic attempt to intervene, his voice trembling like jello on a shaking plate. "Mr. Montero, please, the party is wonderful. Let's not ruin the mood. Marina, why don't you go check the bathrooms?" That was the exit he offered, a backdoor escape from dignity. But Ricardo wasn't done with his show. "Hold on, Carlos." Ricardo raised his hand like a conductor calling the orchestra to silence. "I think I just discovered something interesting here. Did you see how she was cleaning the piano with so much care, so much affection?" He turned to the crowd, his shark-like smile widening. I bet the poor thing thinks she knows something about music, probably saw some movie, I don't know, The Pianist, or some nonsense like that, and now she thinks she's an expert. Marina felt her hands tremble for the first time, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous, memory. The hands that now held cleaning supplies had once held something very different, in a life she had buried so deeply she sometimes doubted it had ever existed. Moscow, 1989. The Tchaikovsky Conservatory. A gold medal at the national competition. An invitation to perform with the St. Petersburg Philharmonic. All of it before the fall, before the escape, before America, before Marina Petrova became just Marina, the cleaning lady. Look at that! Ricardo pointed at Marina's face. I think I struck a nerve. I bet she's imagining what it would be like to sit there and make noise. The audience laughed again, that collective laughter that turns cruelty into socially acceptable entertainment. Ricardo was ecstatic, drunk on his own power. I'll do better. I'll give our dear cleaning lady a chance to show off her musical talents. The silence before Ricardo's next words was like the moment before lightning strikes, when the air is charged and even the birds stop singing. He walked to the Steinway, ran his hand over its polished surface with the reverence of someone touching a relic, then turned to Marina with eyes gleaming with pure malice. It was the look of a man about to drive the final knife into a victim already on the ground. $50,000, he said, and the entire ballroom gasped. I'm offering $50,000 if you can play a complete classical piece on this piano, not Happy Birthday or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I mean real music. Chopin, Beethoven, Mozart. Something that proves you have some culture beyond knowing which product doesn't stain Carrara marble. Marina felt the weight of 200 eyes on her. She saw the phones recording, the morbid amusement on people's faces, the sadistic expectation of watching someone completely destroyed in public. Luciana whispered something into a friend's ear, and both laughed. Carlos had given up on intervening and now just twisted his hands like Lady Macbeth after the crime. The orchestra conductor, a 70-year-old man named Rubens Cavalcanti, watched from the ballroom entrance with an unreadable expression. But, Ricardo continued, savoring each word as if it were vintage wine, if you fail, and we both know you will, you'll do something for me. Something simple, nothing much. He paused dramatically, waiting until he had everyone's full attention. You'll clean this entire ballroom with your tongue, every inch of the marble floor, and you'll do it while everyone here watches and films it for posterity. The shock was audible. Several people gasped. Some laughed nervously, others murmured among themselves. It was too cruel even by their standards. But no one truly protested. Ricardo Montero's power was a gravitational force that bent morality around him, turning witnesses into silent accomplices. Marina closed her eyes for a moment. She saw the faces of her grandchildren, 12-year-old Peter, 10-year-old Anna, 8-year-old Sophie, children who depended on her for everything since they had been orphaned. The rent was due in 3 days. The electric bill was late. Sophie's asthma medication cost $300 a month. $50,000 would solve all their problems for at least 2 years, but cleaning the floor with her tongue, that would be the end. There would be no coming back from such humiliation. It would be filmed, go viral, turned into a meme. Her grandchildren would see it, their whole school would see it. That would be her legacy. The grandmother who licked the floor for money. So, Ricardo pressed, are you going to accept, or are you going to run with your tail between your legs? Oh wait, I forgot to mention. If you refuse, you're fired. Right now. No rights, no nothing. I'll personally make sure you never work in any decent place in this city again. I've got friends everywhere that matters. You'll end up collecting cans on the street, if you're lucky." The clock on the wall read 10:15. The orchestra was due back in 10 minutes for the second set. Marina looked at her hands. Hands that had once been applauded by full houses, hands that had once received flowers from admirers, hands that had once been kissed by grateful conductors. Now they were just cleaning hands, calloused, dry, with short, unpolished nails. But they were still her hands, and they still remembered. "I accept," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. The ballroom exploded in excited murmurs. Ricardo practically danced with joy, already imagining the viral video, the memes, the public confirmation of his superiority. He had no idea what he had just awakened. Marina walked slowly toward the piano, each step echoing through the ballroom like the beat of a giant heart. The sea of faces around her blurred into indistinct shapes, as if she were diving into deep waters where light barely penetrates. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. They trembled from recognition, like hunting dogs catching the scent of prey after years of starvation. The Steinway waited for her, black and gleaming like a portal to a life she had locked in a mental vault and thrown the key into the ocean of forgetfulness. As she walked, fragments of memory burst in her mind like silent fireworks. She saw herself at 22, blonde hair pinned in a perfect bun, the navy blue concert gown her mother had sewn by hand. The Tchaikovsky Conservatory in Moscow, December 1989, the national competition that would change her life. She remembered the biting cold, the smell of wax on the wooden floor, the weight of her teacher's expectations. Marina Petrova, the prodigy from Vladivostok, the girl who had started playing at 4 on a broken piano her father had salvaged from a bombed-out building. She had won. Gold medal, invitation to the Philharmonic, a future opening like an infinite score of possibilities. Then came the fall, not of the Berlin Wall, but of her own life. Her father dead in a suspicious accident. He had exposed corruption in the party. Her mother wasting away in grief. Her siblings scattered like seeds in the wind. And she, Marina, fleeing to America with false papers and $200 sewn into the hem of her coat. 1991, New York. Without speaking English, without knowing anyone, with nothing but her hands and the music she carried like an invisible vital organ. But music didn't pay rent when you were undocumented. Music didn't buy food when you had no papers. Music didn't cure the homesickness that corroded like acid. So Marina Petrova died, and Marina, the cleaning woman, was born. 32 years of that living death. She stopped in front of the piano and removed her yellow rubber gloves with the solemnity of a medieval knight taking off his gauntlets before a duel. Each finger was freed deliberately, as if she were releasing birds from a cage. The silence in the ballroom was so profound you could hear the faint buzz of the LED lights in the chandeliers. Ricardo Montero stood 3 yards away, arms crossed, his hyena's grin painted on his face like the makeup of a killer clown. "Come on, Cinderella," he taunted, his voice slicing the silence like paper being torn. "The clock is ticking. 10 minutes until the orchestra comes back. Show us your magic." Marina pulled the adjustable leather bench closer and sat with her back perfectly straight, her feet positioned at just the right distance from the pedals. They were automatic muscle movements, etched into her fibers like genetic code, survivors of 32 years of dormancy. She raised her hands and hovered them over the keys without touching them, letting them float a fraction of an inch above like magnets with opposite poles. The entire ballroom held its breath collectively. Even Ricardo leaned forward, sensing something unexpected was about to happen. The first touch was middle C, a single note that Marina held for a full 3 seconds, letting the sound fill the space like water pouring into a glass. The quality of the tone made conductor Rubens Cavalcanti, who had quietly stepped closer, furrow his brow. This was not the touch of an amateur. There was weight, there was control, there was that indefinable quality that separates someone who learned piano from someone born for it. Marina then played an ascending chromatic scale, each note crystalline and perfectly spaced, her fingers dancing with the precision of a Swiss watch. When she reached the highest C, she paused, took a deep breath, and dove in. The music that burst from the Steinway was like a dam breaking after decades of pent-up pressure. It was Chopin's Etude Opus 10 No. 4, known among pianists as the Torrent, a piece so devilishly complex that even seasoned professionals often avoided it in public performance. Marina's hands became controlled blurs, the right executing chromatic scales in 16th notes while the left carried a melody that floated above the storm like a ship on rough seas. The entire ballroom froze. Waiters stopped mid-step with trays suspended. Conversations died like candles snuffed out. Phones that had been recording for amusement now trembled in their owners' hands, capturing something they barely knew how to process. Ricardo Montero staggered 3 steps backward as if shoved by an invisible hand. His face, moments earlier flushed with alcohol and arrogance, was now pale as flour. He knew that piece. He had paid $15,000 for a famous pianist to play it at Luciana's birthday 5 years earlier, and the man had made 2 noticeable mistakes. Marina was making none. She was transcending the score itself, adding flourishes Chopin would have applauded, shaping dynamics that turned notes into pure emotion. It was like watching someone rise from the dead and immediately run a marathon. Luciana Montero dropped her iPhone to the floor with a clatter no one heard. Her mouth formed a perfect O of astonishment, her $3,000 gloss shining like a halo around the whole of her shock. She had studied piano from age 7 to 17, with private tutors charging $500 an hour, and she could barely play a Clementi sonatina without stumbling. What she was witnessing was not mere skill, it was art at the highest level, the kind of performance you see once in a lifetime in packed concert halls where the cheapest ticket costs $800. Conductor Rubens Cavalcanti stepped even closer, his trained eyes analyzing every movement of Marina's hands. He had conducted the best orchestras in the country, had worked with international soloists, had dedicated 50 years of his life to classical music, and he was struggling to believe what he was seeing and hearing. The technique was impeccable, but there was more. There was soul, there was history, there was pain transformed into beauty, the kind only true artists can reach. When Marina reached the climax of the piece, both hands executing parallel scales at impossible speed, a solitary tear slid down the maestro's wrinkled cheek. Marina didn't stop when she finished Chopin's Etude. Without pause, without a breath, she launched straight into Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, a piece usually reserved as the grand finale of recitals due to its extreme technical and emotional demands. Her hands weren't just playing the piano now. They were mastering it, commanding it, extracting sounds that seemed impossible from a single instrument. The Lassen section, slow and melancholy, made 3 women begin to cry without knowing exactly why. When she burst into the Friska, the fast and furious part imitating wild Hungarian dance, two waiters dropped their trays, the crash of shattering porcelain creating an involuntary percussion that Marina incorporated seamlessly into her performance. The plaza's ballroom had transformed into an impromptu concert hall, and the 200 guests of the engagement party were now a spellbound audience. No one moved. No one spoke. Hardly anyone dared breathe for fear of breaking the enchantment. Lawyers who charged $2,000 an hour stood frozen like statues of salt. Doctors who performed $500,000 surgeries watched with their mouths open. Businessmen who moved millions daily found themselves reduced to wide-eyed children before an incomprehensible magic trick. Marina was elsewhere now, transported beyond the ballroom, beyond America, beyond time itself. She was back at the Tchaikovsky Conservatory. She was at Carnegie Hall she never got to know. She was on every stage her stolen life should have reached. Her fingers were no longer mere appendages. They were direct extensions of her soul, channels through which 32 years of bottled music poured like volcanic lava. When she attacked the final cadenza of the Rhapsody, with glissandos racing up and down the keyboard like horizontal lightning bolts, the piano itself seemed alive, vibrating with an energy that made the chandelier's crystals chime in harmony. Then Marina did something no classical pianist would normally do in a formal performance. She began to improvise. But it wasn't just any improvisation. It was a synthesis of everything she had played. An instant composition weaving Chopin's themes, Liszt's motifs, and melodies from her own story. There were fragments of Russian lullabies her mother used to sing, echoes of Brazilian sambas she had absorbed in 3 decades, the cries of her grandchildren when they were orphaned, the sound of cleaning products scrubbing expensive marble. It was an autobiography in music, each note telling a chapter of a life no one there could have imagined. Conductor Rubens Cavalcanti was openly crying now, tears running freely down his dignified face. He had recognized something in Marina's technique, something scratching at the back of his memory like a forgotten melody. That style, that particular approach to dynamics, that way of striking the notes. He had seen it only once, in a grainy YouTube video of a Soviet competition in 1989. A young blonde pianist who had mysteriously disappeared right after winning the gold medal. Her name was Marina Petrova. The revelation hit the maestro like a punch to the stomach. He looked at the woman at the piano, her hair now gray and short, her face marked by decades of hard work, her hands he had seen holding buckets and cloths, and he saw through time's disguise. It was her, the lost prodigy. One of the greatest pianists Russia had produced in the second half of the 20th century, playing for a crowd of drunken socialites who had no idea of the privilege they were witnessing. It was like discovering the Mona Lisa being used as a pot holder in a suburban kitchen. When Marina finally lifted her hands from the keyboard, the silence that followed was so profound it felt physical, as if the air itself had solidified into crystal. 17 seconds passed. Someone timed it later, before Maestro Rubens Cavalcanti began to clap. The solitary sound of his applause echoed through the ballroom like gunshots in a cathedral, and then, as if it were a signal, everyone erupted in applause. But Marina wasn't seeing the present. Her eyes were closed, and she was somewhere else, some other time. Moscow, December 23rd, 1989. The great hall of the Tchaikovsky Conservatory, 2,000 seats, everyone filled. She was 22 and had just performed The Soviet audience, normally reserved, was on its feet shouting, "Brava!" and throwing flowers onto the stage. Her teacher, the legendary Viktor Merchanov, wept backstage. "You will be greater than Richter," he had told her, referring to the mythical Sviatoslav Richter. "The whole world will know your name." 3 months later, her father was dead, her family destroyed, and Marina Petrova was on a plane to New York with false papers identifying her only as Marina. No last name, no past, no future. The first years in America were a waking nightmare she preferred not to remember fully. Sleeping in shelters when she was lucky, on the street when she wasn't. Washing dishes in restaurants that paid under the table because she had no papers. Learning English by eavesdropping on conversations, memorizing words as if they were musical notes. The piano became too painful a memory to carry. Every time she saw one, her heart broke a little more until she decided it was easier to pretend Marina Petrova had never existed. She had a child with a man who disappeared when he found out she was pregnant. She raised the boy alone, cleaning offices at night, studying with him during the day. When he grew up and married, she thought she might finally have some peace. Then he died in a construction accident. His wife ran away, and Marina found herself in her 60s raising 3 small children. That was how Marina Petrova, gold medalist of the Tchaikovsky Conservatory, promise of Soviet classical music, ended up cleaning the Plaza Hotel for 15 years. Every Friday, she polished the Steinway that could have been her instrument in another life. Every Friday, she died a little inside, until tonight, when Ricardo Montero unknowingly had resurrected not just Marina, but Marina Petrova. And now, there was no way to bury her again. The music had escaped its 3-decade prison, and like a genie freed from its lamp, it would not willingly return. Marina opened her eyes slowly, like someone rising from a deep dream and unsure which reality she'll find on the other side of her eyelids. The Plaza Hotel's ballroom was frozen in that impossible moment between the end of the music and the beginning of understanding, when the brain is still processing whether what it just witnessed actually happened or was a collective hallucination. 17 seconds of absolute silence. Luciana Montero would later tell her friends because she had instinctively checked her Cartier watch when the music stopped at 10:27 p.m. and looked again when the maestro began clapping at 10:27 and 17 seconds. Maestro Rubens Cavalcanti rose from where he'd been sitting, his old mottled hands producing a solitary yet powerful sound that split the silence like an axe cleaving ice. 1 clap, 2, 3. Each one reverberating through the high-ceilinged hall like declarations of war against ignorance. Then he said, his trained baritone projecting effortlessly across the space, "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed something most people pay thousands of dollars to see in concert halls across Europe. This is Marina Petrova, gold medalist of the Tchaikovsky Conservatory in Moscow in 1989, one of the greatest living pianists in the world." The revelation fell on the audience like a neutron bomb, obliterating their prior perceptions while leaving their bodies intact. Ricardo Montero took 2 more steps back and had to brace himself against a marble column, his face now the color of wet papier-mâché. Luciana dropped her $800 bottle of Cristal champagne, the Baccarat crystal shattering across the floor in an explosion of fragments no one moved to clean. Carlos, the manager, had to sit down because his legs simply stopped working. And then, like a dam finally yielding to the pressure, everyone began to applaud. First timidly, as if unsure whether they had permission to applaud the cleaning lady, then more strongly, until the entire hall was on its feet, in an ovation that made the chandeliers quiver dangerously. Marina remained seated at the piano, her hands now resting lightly on the keys like birds perched on familiar branches. She studied Ricardo Montero with an expression that was neither triumph nor revenge, but something far more devastating: pity. It was the look you give a child who has smashed his favorite toy in a fit of rage and now sobs over the irreparable pieces. Ricardo tried to speak 3 times before any sound left his throat, and when he finally managed it, his voice was unrecognizable, stripped of the arrogance that had inflated it for 58 years. That was... You can't be... He stammered like an engine trying to turn over on a Russian winter morning. It's some trick. It has to be. You're a cleaning lady. I know you're a cleaning lady. 15 years. You clean bathrooms, for God's sake. The desperate denial in his voice was almost comical if it weren't so pathetic. It was the sound of a man watching his entire world, a world built on the premise that money equals superiority, collapse like a house of cards in a gale. Maestro Cavalcanti walked to the center of the hall, his presence commanding instant attention. He had conducted orchestras in Vienna, in Berlin, in New York. He had worked with Barenboim, with Argerich, with Ashkenazi. His word in the classical music world carried the weight of scripture. "Mr. Montero," he said, his voice as sharp as a scalpel, "you have just wagered $50,000 against one of the 10 greatest living pianists on the planet. A woman who, were it not for the tragedy that brought her here, would today be playing Carnegie Hall for $100,000 fees. A woman you publicly humiliated, whom you forced to choose between dignity and survival." He paused dramatically, letting each word sink like nails into a coffin. "You didn't just lose the bet. You revealed yourself as the real servant here, a servant to your own ignorance and prejudice." Luciana Montero tried to defend her father, her sharp voice slicing the air like nails on a chalkboard. "That's not fair. She deceived us. She pretended to be a maid when she's actually... She stopped, realizing there was no way to finish the sentence without digging deeper. Marina finally rose from the piano, her posture now completely different. No longer the defensive curve of a cleaning woman, but the upright spine of an artist who has played for thousands. "I never pretended anything, girl," Marina said, her voice carrying a Russian accent she had suppressed for 3 decades, but which now flowed naturally. "I am a cleaning lady. I've cleaned this hall every Friday for 15 years. I know every stain in the carpet, every scratch in the marble, every crystal in these chandeliers. I am also Marina Petrova, a pianist. The 2 things don't cancel each other out. What your father doesn't understand, what all of you seem not to understand, is that a person's worth isn't in the job they do, but in the heart they carry." She walked up to Ricardo, who now seemed to have shrunk inside his $20,000 tux. "You said I was worth less than this piano. Maybe in monetary terms that's true, but this piano without someone to play it is only wood and metal. No soul, no purpose, like you and your money." The hall was silent again, but now it was the silence of people re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about the world. Lawyers who had spent their lives measuring value by billable hour, doctors who charged by the procedure, business people who calculated human beings as assets and liabilities, all confronted with the reality that they had watched a cleaning lady reveal herself as a national treasure, while a millionaire revealed himself as spiritually bankrupt. The phones that had begun recording for morbid fun were now capturing history. In minutes, the videos would be online. In hours, they would go viral. In days, all of America would know the story of Marina Petrova, the cleaning lady pianist who humbled arrogance with art. Ricardo Montero was cornered like a rat in a maze, 200 pairs of eyes fixed on him, awaiting his next move. Sweat ran down his forehead in rivers his imported gel could no longer hold back, forming dark stains on his $300 collar. He looked around for an exit, any exit, but his own friends, those who minutes earlier had laughed at his cruel jokes, were now edging away from him as if he carried a contagious disease. Shame, Ricardo discovered at that moment, is indeed contagious in social circles where reputation is worth more than character. "So," Marina said calmly, returning to her cleaner's roots and picking up the bucket she had abandoned at the start of this drama. "You have two options, as set in the wager. $50,000 or—" She paused, glancing at the marble floor gleaming under the lights. "You can fulfill the second part of the deal." The hall held its breath, collectively. No one believed she would truly demand that. But Marina had plans of her own, far more sophisticated than simple revenge. Ricardo tried one last desperate gambit, pulling his checkbook from his inside pocket with hands that trembled so badly he could barely hold it. "I'll pay 100,000, 200,000, whatever you want." His voice had jumped 2 octaves, sounding like a teenager begging not to be punished. "Please, be reasonable. We're civilized adults. We can resolve this with dignity." The irony of Ricardo Montero pleading for dignity after trying to destroy Marina's did not escape anyone. A few people laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the hall like crows cawing. Marina set the bucket on the floor with a metallic thud that sounded like a sentence being pronounced. "You offered me $50,000 to prove I had culture, that I was more than an ignorant maid. I proved it. Now you want to raise the offer so you don't have to fulfill your part. Interesting how money has always been your solution to everything, isn't it?" She walked slowly around him, as she had so many times around stubborn stains in the marble, assessing the best way to deal with the dirt. "But you know what? I don't want your money." The declaration triggered a wave of surprised murmurs. Ricardo clung to that lifeline like a shipwrecked man. "Great. Then it's settled. We can forget this whole nonsense and—" Marina cut him off with a gesture. "I said, I don't want your money. I didn't say you're free of the bet. You will fulfill the second part, but with a modification." She turned to the crowd, her voice now projecting with the same clarity with which she had projected the music. "You will not clean the floor with your tongue. That would be far too degrading, and I am not like you. But you will clean this hall. With these hands that have never held anything heavier than a $1,000 pen. With these knees that have never touched the floor. With this body that has never known real physical work." Luciana tried to intervene again, her Versace gown rustling with indignation. "My father is not a janitor. This is ridiculous. Dad, let's go. Call our lawyers. We'll sue everyone here." But when she tried to take her father's arm to leave, she found he was planted in place like a pillar of salt. Because Ricardo Montero, for the first time in his adult life, was experiencing something completely new: responsibility for his actions. The videos were rolling, the witnesses numbered in the hundreds, and his reputation, the thing he prized most in the world, hung by a thread. Marina took a clean cloth from her kit and held it out to Ricardo. "Start with the restrooms," she said calmly. "That's where I always start. It teaches humility quickly. Then you can do the main hall." I'll supervise to make sure you're doing it right. After all, cleaning is also an art, Mr. Montero. It requires technique, dedication, respect for the space and the people who use it. Things you never learned in your 58 years, but which you might begin to learn today. What happened next would enter the social annals of New York City as the night the plaza stopped. Ricardo Montero, the man who built a construction empire on the backs of underpaid workers, took off his Italian jacket, rolled up the sleeves of his silk shirt, and grabbed the cloth Marina offered. His movements were clumsy, like those of a marionette worked by a drunken puppeteer, but he knelt. Ricardo Montero knelt and began scrubbing the men's room floor under Marina's technical supervision and the stunned gazes of dozens of guests crowding the doorway like tourists at a zoo. While Ricardo learned the difference between a neutral cleaner and an all-purpose one, something extraordinary was happening in the main hall. The hotel's owner, Sebastian Ames, had arrived at a run after receiving no fewer than 43 messages about what was happening in his establishment. A 70-year-old art collector and patron of the New York Philharmonic, he had watched the final minutes of Marina's performance on a shaky WhatsApp video and driven over, shattering every speed limit. Now he stood before Marina, who was supervising Ricardo as he cleaned a toilet with tears in his eyes and a contract in his hand. "Ms. Petrova," he said, and Marina turned, surprised to hear her full name spoken with respect. "I'm Sebastian Ames, the owner of this hotel. What I witnessed tonight, what you did, is the most extraordinary thing to happen in these halls in 80 years of history." He extended the contract to her. "This is a job offer. Not as a cleaner, though you are clearly exceptional at that as well. As the Plaza Hotel's resident pianist. $30,000 a month plus benefits plus performance commissions. 3 shows a week in the hotel bar with complete freedom of repertoire." Marina looked at the paper as if it were written in an alien language. $30,000 a month to do what she had been born to do. It was more than she had earned in 2 years of cleaning. But I have 3 grandchildren to care for. I can't stay here late every night." Sebastian smiled. "The contract includes an educational program, full music scholarships for all 3 at Juilliard Pre-College. If they've inherited 1/10 of your talent, they'll be the next prodigies of this city." From the restroom came the sound of Ricardo Montero vomiting. The combination of humiliation, physical effort, and the smell of cleaning products had been too much for a stomach accustomed to champagne and caviar. Marina went in and, through a gesture that left everyone speechless, knelt beside him and held his forehead as he recovered, exactly as she had done with her grandchildren when they were sick. "Breathe deeply," she said gently. "The nausea passes. The lesson, I hope, remains." When Ricardo finally finished cleaning, 2.5 hours later with his hands raw and his back in agony, he was unrecognizable. Not just physically, drenched in sweat and with his $20,000 suit ruined, but something in his eyes had changed. It was as if he had seen his own reflection for the first time and didn't like what he found. Before leaving, staggering from exhaustion, he turned to Marina and said a single word, "Thank you." And for the first time in decades, it was sincere. The video of the cleaning lady pianist went viral worldwide, racking up 100 million views in a single week. Marina Petrova became the resident pianist at the Plaza Hotel, where every Friday the ballroom filled to capacity to hear her play. Ricardo Montero sold half of his companies and created a foundation for musical education for underprivileged children. He never humiliated an employee again. Some say that sometimes on Friday nights he sits in the back row of the Plaza Hotel bar, listens to Marina play, and discreetly wipes away a tear. Because music, like humility, has the power to transform even the hardest of hearts. And Marina Petrova, the cleaning lady who scrubbed away a man's arrogance with the same hands that cleaned bathrooms and played Chopin, proved that the true worth of a person is not in what they own, but in what they can awaken in others. In the end, it wasn't the music that silenced everyone that night. It was dignity. The dignity of a woman who never let hard work kill her art, who never let humiliation kill her humanity, and who never let anyone tell her what she was worth. Because Marina Petrova had always known she was priceless.